Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, James Randi.
Good morning. It is morning. It's just 8:30 in the morning, and sun is shining brightly, and we haven't got a hurricane at the moment, so let's move on while we can.
Things are looking good. Now, if you don't mind, Randy, I'll ask you right at the start, how's your health? Because I know you had a few problems earlier in the year.
Well, very good, actually, Richard. I am making a remarkable recovery. I just had the privilege of speaking with an MD who happened upon me the other day. It had a triple bypass. Mine was only a double, so he had one bypass on me. And he said that looking at me since this happened to me at the beginning of February, the last February, that is, he said that I was doing remarkably well, and he was quite amazed that a guy 78 years of age, I lie about my age, that I was doing as well as I am. And I am recovering very nicely, and I'm rather surprised myself, but I'm doing the regular workouts at the gym. I recommend exercise. I've never involved myself in it before, but now a mild sweat is not all that bad and not too difficult to work up.
That's fantastic. I'm delighted to hear that. I'm sure our listeners are delighted to hear that too. Now let me concentrate for the moment on your adventures, your various adventures here in Australia for our Australian listeners. You've had many visits to Australia, and we're always glad to see you. I think your first, if I'm not mistaken, was around about 1980, where you conducted some very famous water divining tests.
Yes, that was at the invitation of our good friend Dick Smith, of course, and in the Sydney area we set up some... We were a little naive in those days, Richard, I must say, but not naive enough that we did bad tests. It's just that we could have done tests which were more, produced more evidence. I always like to design tests that show more than they were designed to show in the first place. And I'm rather onto that now. I know how to go about it. But Dick said, there were some fabulously funny things that happened that I don't know if they're on record anywhere. And I'll share one of them with you, if I may. Dick, you got a picture. Dick Smith now. Well, you know Dick very well.
Yeah.
All of Australia knows him. And Dick gathered with me at his office. We were at his office, and we had, I believe, 11 dowsers in the office, all of whom had participated. And we laid out the charts, and we revealed to them that they had failed grandly. And there was much shaking of heads and astonishment that they hadn't succeeded in winning the prize and coming up for worldwide notoriety. And so Dick and I looked at one another as if to say, these poor chaps, which is true. They're genuinely interested and genuinely convinced that they can do this sort of thing. And they were just dismayed rather than angry, I think, and shaking their heads. And Dick asked them the critical question. He said, of all of you here, how many still believe you have the power to dowse? Now, I must interrupt here. The fact that they had failed on this test doesn't mean by any means that they can't do it. It just meant that at this time, this particular example, in this definitive test, they couldn't do it. So they all shot their hands up right away, no hesitation. And Dick sort of looked at me and raised his eyebrows as if to say, sort of what we expected. Then one gentleman started to draw his hand down slowly, and Dick pointed at him and said, "You there," he said, "why have you withdrawn your hand?" And the fellow said quite honestly, looking around a little uneasily, he said, I'd have to reconsider now. Perhaps I just don't have the ability that I believed I had. And the rest of them were a little grumpy looking at that. And Dick turned to me. They left very shortly after that. And Dick turned to me, and he giggled in his way, as only Dick Smith can do. A serious giggle, of course. And he said, we got 1 out of 11. We've never gotten a score like that before. He said, we get 0 out of 11, 0 out of any number. And I said, Dick, give him a chance. Give him a week or so, and he'll get in touch with you, and he'll have a reason for having failed that won't encompass the fact that he can't dowse. And I was wrong on that, however. He called back within the hour. This is in the days before mobile phones and such, and he called from a public phone somewhere down the road, and he said, Mr. Smith, Mr. Randi, I figured out why it was. It was because of the walkie-talkies that you used at the time. They give out radio frequencies, you see, and that interfered with our power to dowse. And he sighed and hung up the phone. So we had scored 0 on that, and Dick sort of looked at me blankly, and I said, Dick, didn't I tell you I was wrong on the estimation of the amount of time? But there you are. But dowsers are unthinkable. They really are.
Yeah.
Yes, Dick did a very good job. That Phil Adams was in on it, and it was very well done, I thought. And you do see Dick at his giggling best in there, I must say.
Yes. Another man who fronted up with some money to support you at the time was the late Richard Carlton from our version of 60 Minutes. Very sorry and very sad to hear that he died a few months ago.
My, yes, and so unexpected. I would have given him a vitality that would carry him another 30 or 40 years myself.
And he was, of course, and here we come back to another adventure with you in Australia, he was, of course, one of the people behind the famous Carlos hoax.
Yes. Yes, he was. In fact, that was essentially Richard's idea. To sum it up very quickly, I got a call from, I guess it was Channel 9, was it?
Yeah, that's right.
And they said they were interested in investigating the channelers that were infesting Australia at the time, and may still be for all I know. And the person on the phone said, can you prove that the channelers are fakes? I said, no, but I can indicate that anyone can do it. And that should go a long way towards showing that it's not necessarily a supernatural event. And the fellow seemed quite interested in that. And I enlisted my good friend Jose Alvarez, the artist, who was right there in the room with me at the time, and several other people gathered, not to expect the phone call. It came right in the middle of our supper, as a matter of fact. I said to Jose, do you want to go to Australia and do this, that, and the other thing? He thought about it for a minute. He said, yes, sounds like an interesting project. And lo and behold, we were off. And I must say that Jose did a beautiful job of it.
Again, that's another famous report, and again, listeners can see that whole incident online. You can see what effect the famous Carlos, the channeled spirit from thousands of years ago, had on the Australian public. In fact, you filled the Sydney Opera House with people.
Well, I wouldn't say filled. We had a substantial crowd there. Filling the Sydney Opera House is a little more ambitious than we wanted to get, but no, we had a substantial crowd of believers there who were fingering their beads, and they had amulets on and all kinds of things, strange-looking folks. I mean, by and large, there were some skeptics there, too, who were looking a little grumpy about the whole thing, but by and large, they were a bunch of flakes. It was very strange. I must say that, Dick has such a moving, Dick Smith is such a moving power behind this kind of thing. We owe him a great debt of thanks, because he was in there. He and Richard Carlson were in there feet first right away. They didn't hesitate whatsoever, and Phil Adams as well. These have been people to whom the Australian public, I think, owes a debt of thanks.
Oh, absolutely right. Of course, Dick is still carrying on with all sorts of amazing adventures and campaigns, and he's a man who puts Australia first, which endears him to many Australians, I think.
Oh, yes, indeed. And what better cause can we think of than putting your country first?
On your various adventures to Australia, I must get to this one, and I think it was around about the same time as the 1980 water divining test was your famous incident on the Don Lane show.
Don Lane had met with me. This was when the Doris Stokes thing was very active, and Don Lane had completely collapsed into her lap. He thought she was the best thing since sliced bread, and he certainly advertised that on his program. He called me and asked if I would be on the show, and I said yes, but we have to have a bit of a conference first. Well, so I went to Melbourne. On the plane, I met a number of people who recognized me because I'd been on TV quite a bit. And I said I was going to do the Don Lane show, and they all were highly amused at that. And I didn't quite know why. But when I got there, I met with Don Lane in his office with his producer, and I said, now, Mr. Lane, I'm not here to be a clown. I'm not going to go in and do the spoon-bending thing and the key-bending thing and the reading the sealed envelope thing as Uri Geller does. we're here to talk about Doris Stokes, I believe. He said, oh, yes, no problem. I said, because doing these tricks just shows that anybody can do these tricks if they have a modicum of skill in conjuring techniques. And he said, oh, yes, I agreed with that. And I said, fine, okay, then let's get down to it. And we discussed what we were going to talk about concerning Doris Stokes. So I went back to the hotel, rested up, prepared myself for the program, went to the studio, and I got there a bit early, and I was wandering about backstage, and the prop man came over to me. Oh, Mr. Randi, will these spoons be sufficient? And he showed me a collection of spoons and keys. And I said, yes, it appears they'll be just fine, thank you. Of course, I knew now that Lane was trying to pull a fast one on me. And indeed, that's exactly what he did. I appeared to be very surprised and even reminded him that he had said we weren't going to do any spoon or key bending. But this was his little trick that he was playing on me, tricking the magician, you see. How clever. He ended up really angry, as you will see from the results of the videotape. He was infuriated. I mean, he turned white right in front of me because I was able to get away with it. There's no question of it. I got away with it. He was quite taken aback and stormed off the set, etc. But we'll let people look at the video. It's very amusing.
It is indeed, and still, as I say, it still invokes a lot of comment. And in fact, it was rebroadcast only about 2 or 3 weeks ago on Australian TV as one of the great famous moments in the last 50 years of television. So
I would wonder whether you have very many famous moments in Australian television. Then I don't know. I trust other things came before it, but I must say also, Richard, I was called in to. I think I did it by remote control here from Florida. But when they did some sort of a thing like Don Lane Revisited or something, they did some sort of a tribute to him, and they called me and asked for my contribution. And my closing line on it, after saying that, there was a misunderstanding and we had a good time after all. And I said, oh, by the way, Don, and then I gave him the 2-word command that he had given me. And I had to get the dig in. And your listeners will appreciate that if they take a look at the tape. They'll see his parting words.
An amazing coincidence happened to me a few years ago with Don Lane. I was at a venue for an unrelated reason, and Don Lane was there, and he's a very outgoing man, and he was running around shaking everybody's hand and saying, how do you do? He came up to me and shook my hand, and then he looked at my jacket, and there on my lapel was the James Randi Educational Foundation's Pegasus pin. And I told him what it was because he was curious about it, and he had a very good laugh. So I think he has some good memories of the time as well.
Our encounter is remembered, so I guess he has good reason to remember it well.
I guess he does. Now I'd like to touch just briefly, if I may, on what has been a great influence for me, and I'm sure many other people, simply the number of books, or the quality of books, may I say, that you've produced, from the truth about Uri Geller, or originally the magic of Uri Geller, I think, to Flim Flam, to the Mask of Nostradamus, to the Faith Healers. I couldn't pick a favorite amongst those, but I think Flim Flam is often tagged as one of the highlights.
Well, Flim Flam was my second book. The Magic of Uri Geller, or The Truth About Uri Geller, as it was subsequently called in a later edition, was my first book. And Flim Flam followed immediately on that. Flim Flam, I think, was my most successful book. I couldn't do a count on it, but I know that it sold something like 200 and something thousand copies in the years that it's been in print, and it's used in many college courses as required reading.
Wow.
And suggested reading, because it pretty well covers the whole field, everything from UFOs through crops. Well, no, crop circles weren't around at that time, but through the Von Daniken farce, and it just the scope of the book is rather large. I rather stretched myself out thin there. I had to keep a lot of material back, or the book would have been far too thick. I really want to redo it one of these days. It needs to be redone, but I'm trying to get the rights to the book back so that I can do it on my own and at my own speed.
Yeah, a marvelous book. If listeners haven't read that, I certainly sincerely recommend Flim Flam. If I was to choose a personal favourite, however, Flim Flam's certainly up there amongst them. But I particularly enjoyed The Mask of Nostradamus, and I got particularly angry whilst reading The Faith Healers. You must still get a lot of correspondence over these things.
Not on the Faith Healers. The Faith Healers didn't make any excitement whatsoever because people who already knew that the Faith Healers couldn't do what they said they could do read it and said, yeah, okay. It was no revelation to them. But the faithful rejected it completely, of course. I occasionally get some mail saying that I'm going straight to hell because of that, and I always write back and say, well, I'll be with friends anyway. The hatred that was worked up for me because I was calling this good man of God, this swindler Peter Popoff, for what he really was. He's back on television, and they come right back because people don't want the kind of thing that I outlined in the Faith Healers and in Flim Flam, as a matter of fact. They don't want it. They prefer to have the woo-woo, and that comforts them in some way. So people can't be educated in certain directions, and once they've reached a certain point, that's a point of no return, and they will never drop back into the rational world if they were ever in there in the first place.
Now I see the next amazing meeting will be coming up in January of next year in Las Vegas. This is number 5. When you held the amazing meeting number 1, did you think that would be the only meeting, or did you think there would be more?
Well, as soon as we started to get the reaction and the registration started to pour in, I felt that it had to be an annual event, and it certainly is from now on, as long as we can run it, as long as I can run it, that is, and perhaps my successors as well, because we had over 800 people this last year, Richard. I must say that was most edifying. They tore down the casino and hotel after we left, not because we were there. They were already planning to do that, but we had to scurry around to find a place big enough to accommodate our next audience, and registrations are happening at a good rate, and we always have had people from Australia. In some cases, like 2 to 4 of them or whatever, in some cases larger contingents, and of course always welcome. It's very flattering to think that we can draw people from those distances. In past years, we've had people from Japan and China, as well as Australia, and people from South America, from Peru, from all over Europe. We always have a large UK contingent coming in, and many of our speakers are from the UK as well, particularly Richard Wiseman, of course, a wonderful gentleman. I mean, without him, I don't think the amazing meeting, as we call it, TAM, would be complete.
Yes, and it's often said that Richard Wiseman is Dr. Phil Plate's evil clone.
Well, we did have a good stunt this last year. It was pretty funny. Wiseman came out on stage, was introduced, came out on stage. He had a dark red shirt on and beige slacks, I believe. And he went to the podium, he started his talk, and he went into PowerPoint, and there were some illustrations, a bit of video on the screen, and he stepped aside, and at the end of the PowerPoint, he got a round of applause, and he walked back on again, stepped over to the podium, and started speaking, and people said, what's going on? It was Phil Plait, because Phil Plait had gone out with him and shopped for the same trousers and the same dark red shirts, and they looked so identical, the audience was really titillated by that, to say the least. They had been deceived. But as soon as they heard Richard Wiseman's voice, of course, the accent was gone, and they thought that Wiseman had departed his senses in some way. But it was a good stunt and very funny, and the two of them did a little dance afterwards, sort of a cappella and whatever. It was fun, and we try to do that thing at the amazing meeting, as well as being educational. As we say, entertaining as well as educational.
I'm sure it is. Well, finally, Randy, what, in your opinion, is your greatest success?
Oh, well, what happens, Richard, is one just came in 2 days ago, as a matter of fact. I wish I had it here. I might read a bit of it. I get letters every now and then. Some of them are on email, and some of them are actual postal letters that arrive that usually start out like, You made a big difference in my life, Mr. Randi, because at one time, and they go through a description of how they were deluded by the so-called paranormal and religious claims and whatnot that were dragging them down into irrationality. And they say that they got a book of mine. Now, I wish I had it at hand. It's just in the other room. I've forgotten the name of the gentleman. He's a surgeon now, and he dropped by a matter of a few months ago with a briefcase in his hand. He said, "Mr. Randi, you don't know me, but you made a big difference to my life." And he told me the story that he had a copy of Flim Flam, very well thumbed, I assure you, and with bits of paper stuck in it all over the place and comments in the margin, some not very flattering to me. And he said, I got 2/3 of the way through the book, and I suddenly looked at myself in the mirror and said, "Hey, he's right." And that revelation is something that hits people sometimes between the eyes. Not always, of course, but sometimes it does. And he said, "I was intending to be a parapsychologist." He said, this was many years ago. He said, "So I decided I'm going to be a surgeon, an abdominal surgeon, and I'm at the local hospital, Broward General Hospital, just down the street from us here." And he said, "Anytime you want abdominal surgery," he said, I hope you don't have to have it, but, I might give you a reduced rate." And so I've taken that. I put his name up on the bulletin board just in case I get appendicitis or something. I'll give him a call right away. No, interestingly enough, he changed his profession, his entire profession. He went into science, but he went into science that really works. That's really flattering and very, very satisfying, Richard. That's the victory that I have. It's spread out over many people, over many years, in many different countries. And being able to reach out and touch people like that is a huge measure of success, I believe.
Well, long may you be able to continue doing what you're doing, and I think people will be inspired for decades and centuries to come.
Well, thank you, and my books will stay on the shelves, I hope, and will be perpetuated. When the sun goes nova, then I give up,
James, the amazing Randi, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.